Okay, it's already 8:05, so let's start. Good morning, everyone, and a happy new year to everyone. So today we'll be discussing urologic emergency. I'm sure you probably have a copy already of this, uh, as this has been already being lectured for the past few years, specifically by me. Okay, so I'm sure you already have a copy of probably even the lecture and the slides. I don't mind, as long as you learn from it. So this would be our objectives, okay? For you to be familiarized with common urologic procedures, be able to identify urologic emergencies according to history, signs and symptoms, etc., etc., okay? But in general, okay, this is not meant to make urologists out of you guys, okay? Basically, what I'm trying to impart to you here for this lecture would be knowledge, no? And the ability to respond as a general practitioner or as a first responder at the ER. So not basically as a urologist. So all the complicated procedures, robotic surgeries, etc., that is not yet for you, not that at your level. Okay, so it's basically to empower you as a general practitioner or as an ER doctor, okay, to be able to respond to these cases, urologic cases, at your level. Okay, so this urologic emergency, this encompasses several lectures, probably around 15 to 20, several chapters in the textbook, probably around 15 to 20 chapters in the textbook. And trying to compress them here in one lecture would be a daunting task. Okay, so basically, this is just a summary of all the urologic emergencies in our practice that is probably more significant for your levels. So just concentrate on this lecture, and 95%, probably even 100% of the questions that I'll be giving out in the exam will be coming from this lecture. Okay. So let's start off with a question. Okay. For example, if you have this 13-year-old female came in because of a vehicular accident, she sustains a grade 5 renal injury. Vital signs are stable. Hemoglobin is at 98 grams per deciliter, which is low. What would be the ideal management for this patient? Of course, number one, you need to know what is grade 5 renal injury. Before that, kindly please type in your questions. Sorry, di ko pala ito na. Please type in your questions in the chat box so that your answers in the chat box so we can see if whether you are you already know the answer for this. Please interrupt me if I do not come in clearly to your screens or to your computers so that I can make the necessary adjustment. Okay, there's only one answer. 2. 4. Ilan ba nasa class ngayon? Sige na, hindi naman kayo this is not graded. 5 lang. This will be the attendance for you, ha? Yung answer sa chat box. 10. Pero akong bata, nagka-counting. Sige na, online lang to, nahihiya pa kayo or either nahihiya kayo or you're not listening. I will not stop until I get a good number from the answers. I will not continue pala. Gone, gone, gone. Sorry, I had to minimize this. Di lumalabas yung message. We have enough time. This will be a short lecture, so keep on answering. Konti pa lang, ilan ba nag-attend sa class? Vince, Prince, is my resident here? Absent then. Okay. More. That's the answer. Sige. We'll know the answer later on, okay? But a lot of you got it right, which means you've been reading beforehand. So it's really quite simple lang, no? And when you talk about this, you talk about guidelines. So what would be the guide? What would the guidelines say? What does the evidence say? And we'll go through that later on, though we won't go much heavily on guidelines. We'll go more with the with generalizations. Okay, so these are your logic. Emergency, you have the trauma and then non-traumatic injuries. Okay? And these are the lists of those cases which we will tackle. Again, this is not everything, but this is probably enough for your level. These are the more common causes. So when you talk about trauma, in general, and lahat yan, you talk about blunt injury, and whether it's penetrating injury. Blunt injury is like a blow to the body, any part of the body. Penetrating injuries, that would be stab wounds, no, any sharp objects, knife, no, gunshot wounds, impalements. And then you also have internal causes, no? And you go through this surgical injuries, no? Of course, these are things that you don't really want to happen to you guys when you do your surgery, but it does happen. It does happen, and usually gets injured. The urinary tract system gets injured during pelvic surgeries or any abdominal surgery for that matter. And this one, and this is very important, especially when we go into clerkship, whether at the fourth year level or as internship, no, traumatic catheterization. And this is very, very important because this could easily be avoidable, and a lot of injuries to urethra are actually caused by traumatic catheterization, no? Whether it's unnecessarily, it's really not supposed to happen, or unavoidable. It's really difficult to insert, like when you have very big prostates, no? Or just because of proper or improper technique in their catheterization. So again, we'll just go through this. This is general surgery. Anybody coming in for trauma, you initially assess them for, of course, for circulation. Okay, it used to be ABC. You start with airway, breathing, circulation. Now it's different. You start with circulation, whether the patient still has blood pressure, blood still circulating. That's the first thing that you check. Next would be the airway, whether the patient is breathing, whether it's obstructed. So, and then on initial assessment, you always try to check whether the patient is stable hemodynamically, meaning in terms of circulation, or the patient is unstable, meaning your blood pressure is going down, patient is tachycardic, hemoglobin levels very, very low. So that will really give you an idea on how you manage your patient, whether you need to do immediate life-saving procedures or treatment, or you can delay, whether you can delay the management of the patient. Okay, so when you talk about life-threatening conditions, usually it's because of severe bleeding. Okay, the main problem, bleeding. Okay, and the goals really are, of course, to improve circulation or bring it back to normal levels. So when you have bleeding, first thing is you restore the volume. How do you do that? First with IV fluids, so that at least you can restore the volume of the blood. And next would be to give blood products. Okay, so blood, intravenous fluid, and then once you're able to do that, then you can go ahead with either immediate surgery or exploration to control or stop the bleeding. So with every injury, always stage the injury so that you'll know how severe the injury is. So staging is just means to determine the extent of the injury, okay? How severe the injury is, okay? And this is usually done through diagnostic imaging. And that will determine your management. Okay. Now, when you talk about blunt trauma, these are direct blows to the body, blunt trauma. Okay. And the most easily injured in the urinary tract system are the solid organs. And when you take a look, imagine the urinary tract system, the kidney, the ureter, the bladder, the urethra. Which of this is a solid organ? You only have the kidney. And that's why for blunt traumas, the kidney is the most commonly injured in the urinary tract system. Easy to understand, diba? When you talk naman about the abdominal cavity, blunt trauma, you have, what are the solid organs in the abdominal cavity? You have the spleen, you have the liver, and those are the commonly affected organs in the body. So easy to understand, blunt trauma, solid organs, most commonly injured. In the urinary tract system, the solid organ there would be the kidneys. And so that would be the most easily injured. Okay. When you have bladder injury, it is usually when the bladder is full at the time of the injury. Punong-puno yung bladder, no? And that's why the pressure is very high. And you add additional pressure to the bladder, then the chances for it to rupture would be high. But if the bladder is empty at the time of the injury, it's very unlikely that the bladder will get injured with a blunt trauma. Okay. So when you talk about bladder injuries or urethral injuries, it's usually because of pelvic fractures, no, saddle injuries. In pelvic fractures, the bony structures that are broken or fragmented can get into the bladder or injure the bladder. And that's how the bladder gets injured. And also, when you think about the ureters, very, very uncommon talaga that you get a ureteral injury from blunt trauma. Okay, so quite easy to understand, hard to miss. When you have you expect a blunt injury to the urinary tract system, most likely it would be the kidney. But we'll go through that. Okay, so again, most common and the blunt trauma is the most common cause of renal injury. Then you also have penetrating gunshots or stab wounds. But the most common will be blunt trauma, vehicular accidents, falls, etc., etc. And so the mechanism of injury is actually direct force to the flank, back, or the abdomen. But if you palpate for your kidneys, you will not be able to palpate the kidneys at the back. Okay? It is largely protected by your thoracic cage. Only a small part, the lower pole of the kidney, is exposed. Very, very small part. So it has to be a big blow to the flank area. No? My preceptorials would know where the flank is. So the flank would be on the side, not at the back. You talk about flank, it's on the side, tagilid, tagiliran, not back. Okay. So when there's direct force, then that can cause injury. So you have to have a high degree of suspicion on that. So there's there's hematoma on the flank side. No? There are signs of injury, direct blow to the flank side. There's fracture on the 11th, 12th rib. Then you would suspect that there must be a severe blunt injury to that area that may have affected the kidneys. Another form of injury would be deceleration injury. Okay. The kidney is very mobile. And when you suddenly stop, it moves also forward by inertia. So it moves a lot. It's movable. And so when you have deceleration injury, meaning you ride on a fast car, speeding up at 200 kilometers per hour, 250 kilometers per hour, then it suddenly stops or hits a wall with a sudden stop. There could be sudden movement of your kidney along its pedicle, just as the picture will show here, okay? And that can pull on the vessels, okay? There's upward, downward, or side-to-side movement of the kidney pulling on the renal artery, the renal vein, or the ureter. And that could injure the artery, the vein, or the ureters. So again, I've talked about this. Signs, there's ecchymosis or hematoma on the flank or the abdomen, hemodynamic instability, blood pressure goes down, the patient's tachycardic, there's pallor, and when there's pain on the flank or abdominal distension, and of course, hematuria. We'll go through that later. So the symptoms would be, of course, abdominal pain. Okay. Patient might be bleeding through the urine, any signs of hemodynamic instability or blood loss, dizziness, altered consciousness, etc. So one of the most common signs of injury to the urinary tract system, not just to the kidney, would be hematuria. Hematuria meaning there's blood in the urine. So when you have trauma and there's blood in the urine, you won't suspect that, patient might have liver injury, diba? So when you have hematuria, you always suspect there must be injury to the urinary tract system. Okay. So it could be gross, meaning you see the blood, the urine is really reddish to pinkish, okay. Or it could just be microscopic. The urine is clear, but on urinalysis there's hematuria. So there's microscopic hematuria. And this would usually indicate surgery. However, in deceleration injuries, wherein the injury is only in the renal artery or the renal vein, and there's no injury to the kidney, there might not be any hematuria, whether microscopic or gross. So when the urine is clear, it doesn't really tell you that the urinary tract system is not injured. You must have a high index of suspicion. Like, for example, deceleration injuries. But the urine is clear, you still need to check on the urinary tract system. you need to check for renal injuries because of what we discussed a while back. Okay. So the degree of hematuria does not always correspond to the severity of injury. But of course, when you have gross hematuria, that will probably tell you, oh, you must have injury along the urinary tract system. So that's one of the basic signs, hematuria. And so when you have renal injury, and we talked about staging a while back, how do you do that? And when do you do staging? For those when you suspect any urinary tract system injury. So again, hematuria, when you have those other signs, blunt trauma to the abdomen or to the flank area. Okay. So as I said here, hematuria, but with strong suspicion for injury. And of course, if the patient is stable in terms of BP, heart rate, then you can do your complete staging. And staging is usually diagnostic. And for this, okay, the diagnostic modality of choice would be whole abdominal CT scan with contrast. That is the diagnostic modality of choice. It is, when you talk about choice for diagnostic tests, you always talk about sensitivity and specificity. With this, you have a high sensitivity and high specificity for urinary tract system injury when you do your abdominal CT scan. All the others are possible options. Arteriography, if you suspect renal vein injury or renal artery injury. IVP used to be the widely used examination, and it's still being used in areas where they don't have the CT scan. But when you do have the CT scan, go for the CT scan. It has to be also with contrast so that you'll be able to delineate the injury as well as the urinary tract system and determine where the injury would be. So again, with urology, as I've told my preceptorials, when there's a question there about diagnostic modality choice and you don't know the answer and you have CT scan there, most likely it would be CT scan. Most of the things that we do, CT scan would be the best diagnostic modality choice. And then once you do your CT scan, then you'll be able to do your staging. And staging would be like this. Though, that would be probably too for you guys. Baka isang question nandito, probably not. Okay. But I won't put too much emphasis on this case. So basically, these are the injuries. Grade 1. So grade 1 would be the mildest. Grade 5 will be the most severe. Okay. So in here, there's only, but wala akong pointer. Is my pointer showing up? Hindi ko na-update ang Zoom. Anyway, my pointer is not working. So there's hematoma on that side, okay, around the kidney. So that's the hematoma. And you can easily see that in your CT scan. Go through this slide if you're really interested into urology. This will give you an idea on how we read it. This is an easy reading, easy go through with the staging of the kidneys. Okay, so just look at the pointers. Okay, and you see here at the topmost pointer, that's where the laceration is in the kidney, and that can be seen on your CT scan. And that's why very, very accurate CT scan. Okay. You can see the hematoma and that. So the white thing, so the kidney, you use the dye so that the kidney lights up and you'll be able to visualize the kidney. Okay, so that's the hematoma and that's the kidney there. And yucks, and that's where the injury is. There's interruption of the contour of the kidney. And then this would be stage 4. There's extravasation of blood, okay, and there's already extravasation of the dye outside, meaning the calcial system, the collecting system of the kidneys are already disrupted or injured. And so the dye goes out of the pelvocalcial system and around the kidney. The white thing, the dark, the very white part area, that's the dye. Okay? It appears like bone on CT scan or on X-ray, as white as the bone in dye. So there's extravasation of contrast. And then for grade 5, this is shattered kidney. So yung pinag-usapan natin na case a while back, you have shattered kidney. Okay. And this one is a grade 5 injury wherein there's minimal hematoma on the kidney, but the ureter or the ureteropelvic junction is already injured, and there's extravasation dye around the see there. So that's grade 5 renal injury, and in this case, the urinalysis may show hematoma because hematuria because of the injury to the ureter. However, in vascular injuries, okay, so you can see there on CT scan, there's no flow of blood into the kidney. So the kidney does not light up. As compared to the other side, the other kidney, as you can see, it lights up. It's whiter than the injured kidney. In this case, there's no flow of blood into the kidney and there's no uptake of the dye. So the kidney does not light up. And that will tell you that there might be renal injury, renal artery injury, or vascular injury to the kidneys because there's no flow. Okay, so in this case, the injury is only in the vascular, in the vascular pedicles, and the kidney might not, the kidney parenchyma by itself is not injured or only mildly injured, then the urinalysis might not show any blood, okay, or just very minimal blood in the kidney. So in this case, you should have a high index of suspicion. Patient comes in probably in the ER, deceleration injury, urinalysis does not show any, there's no hematuria, gross hematuria. On urinalysis, there's no blood, but you suspect a grade 5 hilar injury, and then voila, this would be the one that will show up on your CT scan. Okay. Now, this would be the management, and this would be the answer to the question a while back. At least this one you should know, okay, at least by principle. Quite easy lang naman. It used to be very hard because before, grade 1 to 3, conservative management. Grade 4, you can choose between conservative and surgery, okay? However, right now, all stages, even up to grade 5, we try to manage conservatively grade 5 injury, especially in pediatric patients, okay? And you do this if, number 1, if the patient is, for all those cases, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can manage them conservatively if the patient is hemodynamically stable. The BP is okay, hindi nag-drop, hindi nag-fluctuate, or initially low, but you were able to stabilize it. And the main reason really here is to preserve or conserve the kidney, especially in pediatric patients. Okay, because in grades 1 to 4, it would be quite easy when you do surgery to preserve the kidney, do nephrography or repair of the kidneys. But in stage 5, it's very difficult to do repair of the kidney. And most of the time, when you do indeed open up the patient, you will most likely come up with nephrectomy. Nephrectomy meaning taking out the kidney. Okay. And so in these cases, studies have shown that if you try conservative management, the kidney can heal itself over time and get back to function. Probably not as good as before, but at least you retain some function. And this would be very important for pediatric patients who still have a lot of life ahead of them, a lot of years ahead of them. Imagine 10-year-old patient and you took out the kidney already by that age. Okay, he has only one kidney left, and the chances for it not to sustain the patient through the rest of his life would be much lower as compared when he has two kidneys. So what are the goals of conservative management? Course number one, you have to maintain hemodynamic stability, meaning maintain the blood pressure at a normal and constant level, stable level, the heart rate, and of course the hemoglobin. And you can do this through blood transfusion, complete bed rest until the bleeding is stable. And of course, you have to increase any increase in the intra-abdominal pressure. So that's why for this patient, it should be strict bed rest for this patient as much as possible talaga. Because any sudden movement, any sudden increase in intra-abdominal pressure can disrupt the clots, and bleeding can ensue again. Matuklap lang, matanggal lang isang clot doon from an artery or vein, bleeding can ensue again. So it has to be, the patient has to be on complete bed rest to prevent any sudden increase in abdominal pressure. So that healing will ensue, and once the clots are stable, the lacerations are stable, then the chances for rebleeding would be much lower. And then, of course, you need to do your serial H&H just to check whether there's active bleeding or not. So when the hemoglobin is stable all throughout, then that will tell you there's probably no active bleeding. But when the hematocrit, over time, after a day, after two, gradually or rapidly goes down, that will tell you that there will be bleeding, still be continuous bleeding. And when you have that, then there might be a need for surgery. And then, of course, you have to have your serial CT scan. You just cannot rely on your hemoglobin and hematocrit because, again, that's not really a very accurate measurement of bleeding or indicator of bleeding in the abdominal cavity. So you have to have your serial CT scan and check whether the hematoma is increasing or not. So the hematoma volume must be stable or gradually decreasing. When the hematoma is increasing in the serial CT scan, then you might need to do surgery later on. Okay. The good thing about so why can we do this? I think I was not able to address this because unlike when you have bleeding in the abdominal cavity, okay, because you have a very big abdominal cavity, the bleeding could really be very severe. You could lose 5, 8, 10 liters in the abdominal cavity before it compresses can cause compression on the bleeding site and cause tamponade. In the retroperitoneal space, you do not actually have a space like the abdominal cavity, like the peritoneum. So it's a very close space, the retroperitoneum. So when there's increased blood pressure, okay, there's really little area for it to expand. And so the pressure would be higher in the retroperitoneal cavity when there's bleeding. And this pressure and the volume of the blood would have a tamponade effect on the kidney. And that's why it's much easier to do conservative management on your kidneys rather with the spleen or the liver. So when you have renal injuries, at least basic things, no? Terms, repair, meaning repair of the kidney, we call it nephrorrhaphy. When you say raphy, it's repair. No? When you take out the kidneys, nephrectomy. And then, of course, vascular repair for vascular injuries. So you only do this if you have an unstable patient, okay? And if conservative treatment fails. So the answer, 4, okay? Conservative management. Okay, now we talk about ureteral injury. Now, imagine the ureter. It's long, but it's only a very small tube in the urinary tract system. It's only about 2 to 8 millimeters in diameter, okay, in some areas. And up to the area of the bladder, it will be around 1 to 5 millimeters, okay? And so it's not easily injured with trauma. With trauma, when you talk about blunt traumas, when you talk about penetrating injuries, gunshots, stab wounds, it's not uncommon. It's easy to miss. Unlike the kidney, when you have, it's a big organ, so it's quite easy to hit. But with the ureter, it's not easy to injure. Okay, so most of the injuries are due to abdominal injuries or pelvic injuries. No, gynae surgeries, colonic surgeries. We have big tumors in the uterus or the ovaries, probably already compressing on the ureters, and so the dissection would be quite difficult. So the ureters might be cut, no, ligated, no. They put a suture around it, thinking it's part of the tumor or a blood vessel. It gets avulsed during the dissection or during cauterization of the tumor, no, extirpation of the tumor, it gets burned with the cautery. So ureteral injuries are most likely due to surgical injuries. So this shows you the relationship of the ureter with the pelvic organs, okay? Especially the uterus and the ovaries. So as you can see, it's intimately close, no, related to this structure. So imagine you have a large uterus, a large uteral tumor, or a large ovarian tumor, 10 centimeters. That would be probably already impinging or compressing on the ureter. And the dissection will be quite difficult. And that's why when the gynecologic surgeons, no, do this very difficult surgeries, they would sometimes, or most of the time, call us up so that we would, for us to place a stent into the ureter, a tube into the ureter, so that during dissection, they would be able to palpate the stent and know where the ureter is. Otherwise, if you do not have any stent, it would be hard to palpate or look for the ureter in this area, because it's really very small. So think about it. So when you transect the ureter, what would happen? So there would be leakage of the urine around that area. So if it undetected, that would cause fever, no? Pain on the flank if it's high up in the ureter, pain in the abdomen, or pain on the pelvic area if it's down into the distal ureter. And because of this, you might have nausea, vomiting, because of inflammation in that area. And urine per vagina, urine will be going out from the vagina if the injury, no, causes fistula into the vagina. This would happen when they do tabiso and take out the uterus and the ovaries, and during repair, okay, they injure the ureter, and with the injury comes healing, and when it's attached to the vagina, then fistula would be created upon healing of that area. So that's what you call as ureterovaginal fistula. But this would be already a late, no, or chronic sequelae of the injury. And again, what would the imaging studies for this? Again, a CT urogram. Okay. CT urogram so that you'll be able to delineate the ureter. That would still be the diagnostic modality of choice. If you do not have any, then you'd have the IVP or the intravenous pyelogram or a more invasive retrograde pyelogram. Okay, but then again, the answer would be CT urogram. This would come in other terms, whole abdominal CT scan with contrast, no? But CT urogram, when you request for that, it really implies that I want to see the urinary tract system. I want to visualize the urinary tract system. Okay, and that's why you call it CT urogram. And so this would be samples of that. So here, as you can see, the pointers there. Okay, there shouldn't be any extravasation of the dye from the kidneys down to the bladder. But in this case, you can see that there's some interruption along the ureter, and there's extravasation of the dye along that area. So that will give you an idea as to where the injury is in the ureter, and of course the presence of the injury. So when would be the best time for treatment? At the time of the injury itself. So when they do the pelvic surgeries, the best time, and when they injure the ureter, the best time to address that injury would be at that time. Repair it immediately, or whatever other means of management that you can do. Okay. And that's why it's quite important to have a stent or a tube within the ureter, because again, it's quite difficult to identify the ureter when you have a very big ovarian tumor, uterine tumor, or a very big sigmoid tumor. You might already be injuring the ureter and you don't know it. Okay. But if you have the stent in place, they can palpate for that. And after the surgery, they can look for the ureter again, palpate for it, check if there are any burns there. If they think that they have shave off the ureter, or when the stent or the tube is clearly seen, kitang-kita na, it means they have prostatected the ureter. Okay, and so that will give them a guide. Okay. Now, of course, but this again would be probably it's for you to know that the best time for treatment would be surgery. Okay, and of course, when there's late recognition, then your options are quite different. Okay, immediate repair might be different because of the inflammation around that area. The repair would not be good. So for these things, you might need to stabilize the patient. Okay, just drain out the kidney by doing a nephrostomy, or if you can put in a stent. So this would be nice to know, not at your level. So when there's proximal renal injury, meaning there's injury in this area, we can do end-to-end ureterostomy. Or if it's a long segment, di mo mapag-abot yung dalawa, you cannot approximate the ends of the ureter, you can do bowel replacement using the colon or small intestine. Or auto-transplantation. I'll show you how it is. So this would be very simple, ureterostomy. At least know the term, okay? So when you have only a short segment that is injured, then you can debride both ends, make sure that there's good vascularity at the ends of both ends of the injured area, okay? And then repair it, just reconnect it with sutures. So that's primary end-to-end anastomosis or ureterostomy. That would be the simplest. However, if you have a long segment, then you might need to use a bowel. Autotransplantation, This would be a very difficult surgery. This is very seldom used, no? Or done. But in this case, what we do is bring down the kidney, no? The whole kidney. No? You take out the whole kidney and then reanastomose the artery and the veins into the iliac vessels, and then reanastomose the ureter into the bladder. Okay. Pero ito na yung pinaka na last on the list. Okay. It's like doing kidney transplant, because when you do kidney transplant, that's where you place the that's where you place the donor kidney, in the pelvic area. So in this case, this is auto transplantation, meaning you use the patient's own kidney and replace, transplant it at another site. Sorry for the sore throat. So that's how it's done. Middle third injury. Again, you can do primary anastomosis if it's just a small segment. But when it's a long segment, okay, you can do a lot of things. So you can swing the kidney to the other side, to the other ureter. That's for the middle third. That's another option. No, for the distal third injuries, these are the options, and we'll go through that in a while. So this would be ureteroneocystostomy. You create another opening into the ureter. Neo meaning new connection with the kidney. Okay. New connection with the bladder. So that's the remnant distal third ureter. That's a normal orifice there. So you create another orifice, another connection into the bladder. And then another way is you dissect the bladder and then pull up the bladder to meet up the distal ureter. Okay, so this would entailing dissecting the bladder, mobilizing it, then pulling it up into the psoas area. Then you suture it into psoas area. It will be stable. Otherwise, if not, it will pull back down into the pelvis. And then if that's not enough, then you can do a Boari flap. You create a flap from the ureter, from the bladder, a tubular flap, and then make it as a new distal ureter. Quite easy to understand. Quite difficult to do, but very doable. We've done a lot of those. So ang dali lang talaga actually. It gets injured, you just need to reconnect it to the bladder area, and the options are there. Bladder injury, again, as I've told you, blunt injury, direct blunt force to the bladder would be uncommon, and it would happen if the bladder is full at the time of injury. Okay, and most of that time, the bladder gets injury from pelvic fractures. You have a fall, the pelvis gets fractured, the fragmented bone punctures into the bladder, and that would be the cause for the injury. So ito, yung mga nag-iinuman on a drinking spree, the bladder is full, then suddenly falls on his buttocks, that can cause bladder injury. That would be blunt bladder injury. So symptoms would be, of course, bladder, suprapubic area, that's in the suprapubic area. That can cause abdominal pain or diffuse vague pain in the pelvic area. But if the bladder ruptures into the abdominal cavity, into the peritoneum, then that can cause abdominal distension, severe abdominal pain. Okay. And one of the symptoms would be inability to void, or there's no patient is unable to void, or there's bloody urine. Again, the imaging of choice would be CT scan, CT scan or CT cystography. Okay. Before we used to do just plain X-ray, we instill a dye into the bladder, but now the CT scan would be the diagnostic modality of choice if you have that. But again, across the country, a lot of hospitals would still be doing the plain X-ray. It gives you also good results. However, CT scan would still be favorable in terms of sensitivity and specificity. So with cystography, cysto is the bladder, graphy is image. What we do is we instill dye into the bladder. So we put in a catheter, fill it up with the dye, and on X-ray or CT scan, the bladder appears white with the dye, just like kanina with the kidneys now. But here you do not have to put in IV fluid. So that's the normal bladder. That's how it's supposed to look like. Smooth, no irregularities, no extravasation of the dye. But in this case here, so you can see there's extravasation of the dye on the right side of the bladder. And on the other side, now, sorry, let's get back to the so this would be extraperitoneal injury. When you talk about bladder injury, we talk about extraperitoneal and intraperitoneal injury. When the injury is at the posterior aspect of the bladder or the lateral aspect, the extravasation of the urine would be usually confined in the pelvic area, no extraperitoneal space. But when there's rupture of the bladder in the dome of the bladder, which is partly intraperitoneal, then there would be extravasation of the dye into the abdominal cavity, as shown here. Okay. Let me pause for a while. I just need to recompose myself. I have itchy throat. Sorry for that interruption, guys. Don't worry. So this would be a intraperitoneal injury, rupture of the bladder contents or the urine into the bladder, into the abdominal cavity, into the peritoneum. Okay. So treatment would be different when you have extraperitoneal and when you have intraperitoneal injury. So extraperitoneal, it's confined to the bladder, into the extraperitoneal space. Okay. For this, you can do conservative management, and you can just put in a catheter, no, and that would be enough. You can do this on your own even, but of course it would be refer this to a urologist. And then the bladder is very forgiving, even if you have very big laceration on the bladder. Okay, as long as you keep the bladder empty, okay, it can heal over time. Very important for it to be empty because that would ensure proper healing. Imagine if the bladder gets filled up, then contracts, filled up, then contracts, then that would limit or delay the or even prevent adequate healing of that area. So putting in a catheter, would prevent filling and refilling of the bladder, and that will promote healing. And over time, that will heal. Very forgiving on bladder. Okay. And we only do surgery if the patient, again, is hemodynamically unstable. Okay. You have very large hematomas, there's persistent bleeding, etc., etc. But for intraperitoneal injuries, this you really need immediate surgery because there's continuous, even if you put in the catheter, you're able to drain the bladder and the bladder does not fill up again, there's already dissemination of the urine into the abdominal cavity. And that will irritate the bladder, and that can lead to infection and abscess in the retroperitoneal space. Of course, and so for that, you need to do immediate repair of the bladder. And we go to urethral injuries. Okay, this would be very uncommon in females, and the reason for that is the females have a very short urethra. Okay. Arnel, nandito ba si Arnel? Kainglet? Okay na, ayaw ko na biluin si Arnel. Okay. So, this would be most common in men because men have long urethra. Okay. And this is usually associated with straddle injuries and pelvic fractures. And this would be classified into posterior and anterior injury. Okay. So to help you understand it better, okay, this is the bladder and this is your urethra. Okay. So you have four segments of the urethra. You have your prostatic, membranous, bulbous, and your penile urethra. Okay. And so this is straddle injury. Okay. When the male hits the perineum against a hard object. This would happen in bikings, in motorcycle accidents, in horse riding, or itong nag-skateboarding. When you see skateboarding, they jump into this rails. They fall, they hit their perineum against the rail. Ayan, every time I see that, urethral injury. So that is straddle injury. That's how the urethra gets usually injured. So what are the signs? And this is very important. Now, this is a hallmark sign of urethral injury. There's blood in the meatus. Patient comes into the ER, then you check him, pull him down the underwear, you see blood in the meatal area. That's a very high, that's a sign of urethral injury. And for this, you have to be very careful, okay? Other signs would be patient would have difficulty or inability to urinate. Again, hematuria. And on inspection, you have perineal hematoma. Of course, detailed history would be very important. So when the patient has straddle injury, then you think about that. Okay. So when you highly suspect urethral injury, see this blood in the meatus or the mechanism of the injury, do not insert a Foley catheter. Okay, remember this: when you are the ER, you consider urethral injury in this patient, do not insert a Foley catheter. Refer immediately to your senior consultant, ER consultant, or to a urologist. Okay, because later on, you'll see there's different degrees of injury of the urethra. So you might have a mild injury, grade 1 injury, mild injury, grade 1, grade 2 injury. Okay, and then you try to put in a catheter and you're not adept in putting a catheter, you might injure the catheter, the urethra. You might upstage the injury of the urethra. So very, very important to take note of this. So refer immediately to your friendly urologist. You know, it's a joke. And so what would be the imaging of choice for us? Talaga favorite sa amin yung dye. No? In this case, di na kailangan ng CT scan. Okay? X-ray would do. And the diagnostic test is called a retrograde urethrogram. So you want to view the urethra. That's why it's called a urethrogram. And again, we use a dye and X-ray for that. Of course, you can also use a CT scan for this, but not necessarily. It would take a longer time, no? And you just get exposed to the CT scan. So in this case, we put in a dye into the ureter, and this is how it should look like. Normal ureter. It's smooth, no extravasation of the dye. Okay. Again, those are the 4 parts of the urethra. And so this is how we do the retrograde urethrogram. And as you can see there's discontinuation of the dye. There's disruption of the urethra. No, it's not continuous. It's not smooth. And there's extravasation of the dye around that area. So that's where the injury will probably be located. So dali lang, ano? Easy, very easy. So these are the type of injuries. I don't expect you to memorize this. Okay, mag-alala. Nice to know, not important for you. Just remember that you have stage 1, stage 2, which are lesser degrees of injury, and you have higher stages of injury. Just remember that when at the ER, you should not be the cause of the upstaging of the injury. Patient might just have stage 1 injury, but you were not able to catch it, and you tried to forcefully insert a catheter, then you might upstage it to stage 3, 4, or even 5. So what are the treatment options? Immediate repair, of course. Do diversion or primary realignment. So we'll go through this. For this, at least you should know you cannot do this on your own. Okay, at your level of an ER doctor or level of a general practitioner. So primary anastomosis, you call it urethroplasty. No? That's basically it. Now, if the patient is unstable, no, or at the time of the injury, you can, at the time ER, when the patient is unable to void, you can put in a cystostomy tube. Now, this will be the fastest way to do it. Insert a cystostomy tube and let the injury heal after some time. So you divert it to the suprapubic area. And then primary alignment is putting in a catheter into the urethra. Okay? And this need expert hands. Kailangan, it must be done by an expert, no? One who is really adept in putting in catheters in these situations. Again, because of what I emphasized later on. And so when you're successful in doing this, okay, the injury can heal around the urethra properly. Can. It's not a given that it will heal properly around the area. So then when you do this, there could be primary reanastomosis. Now, if you do cystostomy, do the catheter insertion, after 3 to 6 weeks of the injury, you need to do something. Either take out the catheter, patient is able to void. But if the patient is unable to void properly, then you do this retrograde again, ureterography, and check for strictures because of the injury. So when there's injury, there's healing, there's scar formation, that can lead to stricture. And for this, nice to know lang, then you can do urethroplasty. There are other options, but at the moment, no, there's endoscopic procedures. At the moment, this would be nice for you to know. So other causes, and very common. So these are things you need to watch out for. Kaya it's not very, you cannot take catheter insertion for granted. It could be one of the most common procedure, one of the probably simplest procedure, but it can also be very catastrophic. I think when you were second year, you had a handout on catheter insertion. We made that handout. If you don't get a copy of that from the surgery department, that would be very helpful for you when you get into clerkship, into internship. Hindi basta-basta lang ang catheter insertion. And you do not want to be the reason why the patient would have a hell of a life after catheter insertion. Okay? So number one cause would be insufficient lubrication. Konting-konti lang lagay. Very, very important in catheter insertion that the urethra should be adequately, the catheter or the urethra or the catheter should be adequately lubricated so that you will have smooth insertion of the catheter. That's the key actually, okay? Second would be the balloon is inflated at the urethra. Very, very common for females because short lang urethra, but for males, okay, if it's long, you really do not know where the balloon is already, whether it's in the bladder or not. So again, very, very important that there's smooth entry of the catheter up to the level of the Y bifurcation of the catheter. No? Kailangan hanggang dulo. It has to be up to the end of the catheter that you are able to insert before inflating the balloon. Now, another emphasis would be catheter removal. For you, it might be simple. Okay? So, when the balloon is not completely deflated before removal, and then you pull it out suddenly, that will cause urethral injury. So it would be best if the one who put in the catheter would also be the one who will remove it. Why? Because number one, it would be, of course, the one who put it would know how much water or fluid he placed into the balloon, whether 5 cc, 10 cc, or 15 cc. Ideally, actually, the catheters would have assigned there how much of what would be the size of the balloon, 5 ml, 10 ml, and it would be best just to put in what is indicated there. So if it's 5 ml, just put in 5 ml. That's enough. But there are certain times you want to put in bigger volumes, but it would be best if you follow the clear markers or the suggestions. So pag 5 ml, just put in 5 ml. Usually just 5 ml. So very important, catheter insertion and catheter removal. Again, this would be all in the, no? I'll have my resident send it out again to you guys. Yung manual on catheters. Who's the president of the class, please get in contact with Prince, my resident, and get a copy of the catheter manual, and please share it around with everyone. Okay. Now, so penile fractures, now this would usually occur when it's not a fracture actually because you don't have bone, but we call it fracture pa rin. Okay. So it's usually rupture of the tunica abiogenea, which surrounds your corpus cavernosum, the vessels there. So usually it's because when you have an erect penis hitting against a hard object. So when does that usually occur? Usually during sexual activities. No? When it hits the pelvis of the female, no? The pubic bone or the pelvis of the female. So usually when on positions like women on top, no, when they do acrobatics like the helicopter, no? They do unorthodox positions, which can overextend the penis, and that would lead to possible rupture of the tunica albuginea. Okay, and we have these patients with some psychological problems wherein when they do masturbation, no, they want to pull hard on their penis when they do the act, and that can lead to rupture of the tunica albuginea. Does it occur when the penis is not erect or flaccid? Rarely, no, rarely. So when the penis is flaccid, even if you whip it into the wall, it won't get penile fracture. You just get hematoma, but not penile fracture. So it has to be in the erect state. Okay, so there's no bone. It's just the tunica albuginea. So here, as you can see, the tunica albuginea, there's rupture of the structure, and so blood goes out of it. And what would be the signs? The signs would be due to the hematoma coming out and going into the surroundings of the penis. So the most common sign, very, very clear sign, is the eggplant sign. Looks like an eggplant. Yeah. Full of hematoma. But you can also have a very, very small hematoma lang on one area if the injury is quite small. A small hematoma, which usually moves around when you touch it or palpate for it. So rolling sign or eggplant deformity. So management is immediate exploration and repair. Doc, even if the injury is just very minimal, yes. Okay. Number one is so that there would be immediate relief. Two would be to preserve good erection. Okay. You want proper healing, so you want primary healing on this case. No? You want primary healing. You want to repair it properly so that it will heal properly. So that it will not end up later with painful erection or end up with deformity of your penis. So we deglove the penis, look for the injury, okay, and then repair that area. Amputation, okay, nice to know. No, usually this would happen pag you have an angry wife, cuts off the penis. You've heard a lot of stories before, not so much now. Okay, when there's constricting rings, this would be for patients who have this sexual predilection, putting rings into their penis, and they forget about it, and then it cuts through the penis. So these are rings. and this is an amputated penis. Of course, this will be beyond your level in terms of repair, but what you need to know, no, is as a general practitioner, no, when you have penile augmentation, right away, patient comes into your clinic or emergency room, put the penis, no, the cut penis in the ice pack container, fill it up with ice, then send them over to a tertiary clinic that does this repair, who can do this repair. And it would be very important, no, to do it within 8 hours after amputation to preserve the penis. So these are the things that we've done. Okay. And we used to have a lot of this, not a lot, but we've done some. We can reconnect that, and some can regain their erection. But most important is, number one, functionality in terms of being able to urinate. Two, of course, would be aesthetic. Scrotal injuries are quite uncommon, but they can occur with straddle injuries, no, or direct blows to the penis, to the scrotum. Quite easy to identify by history and by physical examination. Hematoma. In this case, mere inspection will do, but if you want to be sure, you can do an ultrasound. Okay, so ultrasound would be enough for this. Okay, just to detect the hematoma. No need for a CT scan. So again, when you have blunt trauma, these are the things that you need to do at the ER level. Check if there's blood at meatus. Okay? If there's blood at meatus, do our retrograde urethrogram, etc., etc. We just discuss this. But when there's no blood in the meatus, the history does not show, does not tell you that there might be a urethral injury, then you can insert already your Foley catheter and check whether there's gross hematuria or microscopic hematuria to tell you whether you need to do additional tests to check for injury to the kidneys or the other structures. Okay. So we discussed this. So just look through this. Okay. These are the algorithms when you have a patient coming into your okay. Let's go through this. We already discussed this. Again, even if all things are normal, no hematuria, no if you have a high index of suspicion, always go for your diagnostic test. Okay, you won't be reprimanded for that. No, it would be better to err on the positive side, on the affirmative side, rather than err in the negative side. Okay, so you have index of suspicion, konti lang, no, then might as well do your staging procedure or diagnostic test. So the same with penetrating traumas. Now, for the penetrating traumas is to determine the trajectory of the penetration. If it's towards the flank area, entry in the flank area, or exit in the flank area, then you think about, or entry and exit at the pelvic area, you think about possible urinary tract system injury. And you do the test accordingly. Okay. Now we go to, what time are we? 9:25, enough time. Non-surgical, non-traumatic emergencies. And for pediatric, this is one of the most common when you have paraphimosis. Okay. What does that mean? You have a phimotic prepuce, meaning the opening of the prepuce is very small, constricted. Okay. And then the child plays with his penis, pulls on the prepuce over the glans penis, and then cannot put it back again. So the very small opening that produces a constrictive ring around around the glans penis, and that could lead to necrosis of the glans penis, when it compresses on the blood flow. So this is how it would look like, and this is really an emergency. So first and foremost, when the patient comes in at the ER, you manage the pain first, of course. Okay, you can put in when. How many of you have done circumcision? So if you've done circumcision, you know where to put in the anesthesia for this. No, it's either under on the dorsal area, or you have your what you call as dorsal penile nerve block. Okay. Topical anesthetics, if you really don't know, at least a spray, at least it can give some additional relief, but it would really be best if you have a nerve block in that area. Okay. And then of course you reduce swelling in this area. You can put in cold packs if you're not too adept in doing the immediate procedure. Okay. So this is what you can do at the ER if or in the community, if you really do not have a urologist there. This is what you can do. Okay. Put in the nerve block, give the anesthesia, and then try to pull the prepuce back over the glans penis. Okay. As long as you have adequate anesthesia, you can do this. Because if you don't have anesthesia, the patient will be crying. You will not be able to do that. Okay. So somebody should be holding the patient, especially for younger patients, and then pull the urethra, the prepuce back over the glans penis. At least you can try this. You can use one hand or two hands. Pull it back over the. You need to know, of course, the anatomy. Okay, you know where the prepuce is, glans. Then just pull it. That's quite fast, no? That will not take you about 10-15 minutes, properly done. So, and there's really no danger in doing it on your part. You can at least try it at your level. This is one thing that you can really do for your patient if you do not have any urologist around. But if you have a urologist around, you want to be sure, then you can probably call the urologist. But this is something you can do if you do not really have any urologist around in the immediate vicinity or immediate calling. Now, you can also dorsal slit. Okay, if you cannot really pull it out, you can slit that area, that constricted ring. Of course, syempre, dapat under spinal anesthesia, cut it lang, no? And then when that cuts off, then the ring might slacken off, then you can pull it out. Okay, you can either repair the incision or just leave it at that if it's not too big and it does not bleed. And of course, the definitive management would be circumcision. If you can do it in expert hands, you can probably do it at that time, no? If the swelling is not that severe. But if the swelling is severe, it would be best to let the swelling subside first, not treat for possible infection. And then when the swelling is already resided, then you can do your definitive, which is circumcision. Next would be torsion, and this is usually along pediatric patients, but it can also occur in adult patients. So in this case, the testis has twisted along its axis. So this is usually common when the testis is mobile. Now, when you have a hernia or a very mobile testis, testicular hypermobility, then this might ensue. This might happen. And when it twists around its cord, it blocks off the flow of blood into the penis, and so that can lead to atrophy of the testis. So this is really an emergency procedure, and you have to attend it to it right away. Again, the golden period, just like with any other structures of the body, is 6 to 8 hours. So condition about this, and it might occur during sexual activity. So anything that causes movement, upward movement of your testes, cold temperature, no, or when the patient is aroused, sexually aroused, no, or you have vigorous activity, this can happen. So what are the presentation? These are things that you need to remember. Okay, there's sudden severe testicular pain as compared to orchitis, wherein there's swelling because infection. The swelling is usually gradual through a few to several days. In this case, sudden, a few minutes, a few seconds, sudden pain, sudden enlargement of the testes. No? And there's tenderness when you palpate it, no? Absent cremasteric reflex. The test is high up into the scrotum and on a horizontal line, not longitudinal, horizontal na yung line niya. And when you have a Prenz sign, okay? So when you have orchitis, okay, there's pain on the penis. When you lift up the testis, it affords relief. No, kasi yung pulling on the testis is relief. When there's orchitis, no, infection of the testis. But in testicular torsion, there's absence of relief. Hindi pa rin nawawala. And that's a negative French sign, no? Or French sign, which is suggestive of torsion. It has to be a negative French sign. Okay? And this one would be worthwhile to remember. These are things that you need to know at the ER. When the patient comes in, no, when you're at the community, you can use this twist score. Okay? Again, those are things that I mentioned, and then you score them. So when you have 0 to 2 score, most likely that's not torsion. When it's 3 to 4, intermediate risk, better to refer it right away or do something. 5 to 7%, very high index of suspicion. For this, you nearly need to do something or refer the patient right away to a specialist or to a tertiary center. So twist score would actually be enough for you to do this, would be enough for you to decide whether to do surgery or not. But if ever you have any doubts, 0 to 2, but you're really not sure, 3 to 4, but again, you're not sure about it, you can do additional imaging, and the diagnostic imaging of choice or modality of choice would be an ultrasound with Doppler flow to check for flow of blood into the testis. So in this case, okay, the red and the yellow, that's our blood flows into the testes. Red is the arterial, yellow is the blue would be the venous flow. Okay, so in this case, on the right side, there's increased flow, and that would indicate orchitis. There's inflammation, there's infection, there's increased blood flow into the testes. When there's no flow, what I'm in here, and no flow on the left side, okay, there's no flow, there's no red nor yellow, then that would indicate, okay, torsion for this patient. There's no flow. So what can you do at the ER if you're there? You can do manual detorsion. Okay. How do you do that? You rotate the testes clockwise. Okay. So looking at the patient, okay, you rotate the testes outward, laterally, outward. On the right side, on the left side of the patient, on your right side, left side testis, your right hand, left side of the patient, left testis, clockwise. On the right side of the patient, the right testis, your left hand, counterclockwise. Okay. Now, the definitive management for this patient would be doing surgery. Okay. You detort it and do PECSI. Because if you only detort it, then the torsion might happen again. So you would need to fix the testis into the scrotum. So you do an incision in the testis and the scrotum, dissect out the testis, and then suture it into the scrotum so that it will not move in the future. Now, if the testis is not salvageable, then you do orchiectomy. So on this side, the left side of the patient, your right hand or right side, wala na, no? That's already a necrotic testis. This would need orchiectomy already. So what are the other emergencies? These are the other things. Acute urinary retention, the patient is unable to urinate, renal colic, etc., etc. We'll discuss them. So when you have acute urinary retention, the patient is unable to void. This is very common in elderly patients with enlargement of the prostate. Okay. But it can also occur across all ages, no? And it might happen after surgeries, no? Patient is unable to void. So in this case, the patient would present with inability to void, no urination. Okay. The hypogastric is full, no? Or as you can see here, if the patient is really thin, you can see that the bladder is really very full, no? Distended and distended. Okay. And on PE, you have the distended hypogastric area, full, and it might be tender as well. So how do you manage this? Primarily, urethral catheterization. Insert the catheter and place it inside, okay? Now, if you're unable to do it, the patient has urethral stricture, the prostate is very large. Now, even in expert hands, it's quite difficult to insert. Then we can do suprapubic cystostomy. This is more invasive, okay? But this is another option that you can do. And then later on, you have to address the main problem, which is if it's a stricture, correct the stricture. If it's BPH, address the BPH. We won't go into that anymore. Now, other forms of emergency that you will encounter at the emergency room would be renal pain or flank pains. Patient comes in because of colicky flank pain. And this would usually be due to ureterolithiasis. Okay. Colicky, read on that, no, is different from stabbing pain, vague pain. Colicky is waxing and waning. Okay. There's crescendo, discrescendo. There's contraction of the ureter, then relaxation. So this usually occurs, colicky, okay, colic, no, like the intestines. This usually occurs in hollow muscular organs, wherein there's peristalsis. Peristalsis, okay? The organ or the structure tries to move the contents forward, like the intestine. Peristalsis, contraction to push the contents forward. However, when there's obstruction, it needs to contract more forcefully to push the urine beyond the obstruction, and that's why you feel pain. Then when you contract, the structure contracts, like the ureter, even if the obstruction is still there, no, when it loses its ATP, it cannot contract anymore. It has to relax and regain the ATPs again. So contract as crescendo, increasing pain, crampy pain, and then suddenly, slowly dissipates. Nawawala. Crescendo, decrescendo. And then the obstruction is still there. It contracts again forcefully to push the urine beyond the obstruction, increase the pain. Yeah. So that's colicky pain. No? the kidney does not have colicky pain because it cannot contract. So it only happens in the ureter. So when you have colicky pain, so very, very important that it should be colicky.
Recording stopped.